Are you tired of spending too much of your hard-earned money at the supermarket? Are you dreaming of farm fresh eggs, homegrown veggies, and homemade everything? Well, welcome to Ditch the Store, where we break free from supermarket dependence and take back control of our food and household essentials. I'm CJ, and I'm here to show you that life is too short for store-bought eggs. So let's get started. G'day everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ditch the Store. Episode 146 this week. How much land do you really need? As I said 2 weeks ago, we're going back to basics and talking about homesteading and what it really means and the real core stuff that we need to know for homesteading. And I often get comments on my social media sites, oh, it's okay for you, you've got 120 acres. Of course you can do all those things. Well, I didn't start off with 120 acres. Let me tell you, I started off in a 800 square metre suburban block in Canberra, in a northern suburb of Canberra. And what I started there was the very, very beginnings of my homesteading journey. Now, from there, a couple of years after I started, I was able to move to 2.5 acres, an hour out of Canberra. And yes, that 2.5 acres gave me an opportunity to really go and expand into homesteading proper. We were there for nearly 4 years before we moved to the big farm. Now, those stepping stones aren't always going to be suitable for everybody. Sometimes people are so established in the house that they're in that they're never going to move to a rural area. And I'm in the process of writing my beginner homesteading book at the moment, and I've just dealt with the chapter on, getting started and land and things like that. And it's really important for people to understand that moving to a rural area, if you've always lived in an urban or suburban area, moving to a rural area comes with a whole bunch of challenges that you need to be aware of. Things like looking after your own rubbish disposal, being off-grid with your water, because most rural areas you will be on tank water, not on town water. Gas tanks instead of a gas line connected to your house. In our case, we have no electricity line connected to our house. We are 100% off-grid on electricity, so we have solar panels and batteries. Those kinds of things are stuff that if you haven't lived in a rural area before, it's going to be a culture shock. It's going to be a little bit hard to cope with. So I definitely advocate either trialing it if you can, like house sitting for somebody in that type of area, before you make the plunge and sell your house and buy a farm. Definitely, I would say, have a test run first, because it really isn't for everybody. And I think it's really important that people don't beat themselves up, even if they want to be homesteaders. If they trial a rural live and they sit back and go, man, that is so not for me. I can't do that I can't do septic tanks. Like, I can't worry about getting a septic tank pumped or dealing with overflow issues, because every now and then we have an overflow issue and the smell can be pretty potent. If you can't deal with that, if you can't deal with dealing with your own rubbish, burning all your paper, when you can, and trying to condense down your rubbish so you've got compost going into compost piles, and you're really only throwing out the things that you have to throw out because you can't recycle them in any way. If you can't live like that, that doesn't mean that you can't homestead. You can still homestead on an urban or a suburban block. So I'm going to go through today and talk about the different sizes and what you can do and the things that you kind of need to consider and think about. Now, there are some people that will say, I absolutely can't homestead. I live in a unit. So the first cab off the rank is homesteading on no land. And I'm not kidding. I really am not. People who live in either high density urban housing, so I would say like townhouse type situations here in Australia, where you might have a little courtyard, but you don't have garden space as such. You don't have a lawn space. A lot of courtyards here in Canberra, they just have fake turf down. They don't even have grassed areas. So they'll have paved areas with maybe a little patch of grass somewhere, and that's it. There might be garden beds around the edge of the fence line, but nothing else. Or if you live in an apartment, you may not even have a balcony, but if you have a balcony, I've seen balconies in Canberra, like driving to work, and you drive past these balconies and people have like the entire balcony covered in plants. And I always think if I had to live in an apartment, that's exactly what my balcony would look like. Even though I am such a brown thumb and struggle, I do love having plants. I have plants, in the house and all around us, and I really do love having them. So if I had only a balcony, that's exactly what my balcony would look like. I would have it like a forest out there, So for people who live in apartments or high density urban housing, so townhouses, the kinds of things that you need to think about to start your homesteading journey is windowsill herbs. So having just a little tray that you can grow on your windowsill. It doesn't require a lot of space. It does require sunlight and water, which you can easily provide in the kitchen. But if you have a windowsill in your kitchen that is, that gets some sun, excuse me, recording this early in the morning, so there's going to be some yawning. I haven't had a lot of sleep of late. My leg is still healing. Windowsill herbs are a great one to start with. Herbs are super expensive, and the best bit is you don't have to be growing them all year round. It's lovely to have fresh herbs, but if you have a herb that takes off, for some reason, whenever I grow basil, it always goes crazy, but then it also wants to go to seed. So you then take the leaves and dehydrate them. Now, you don't need a fancy dehydrator. You can dehydrate things in your own oven. So you can dehydrate them. Once they're completely dried, then grind them down and stick them in a jar. And you have dried herbs that you grew yourself that you didn't have to buy from the shop. It's such a tiny first step, but also such an easy one. Every time I go anywhere near somebody's yard that has a bay tree, I automatically say to them, can I take a branch off that? And I literally cut a branch off or peel a branch off, hang it on the veranda for a week or 2, 3. Once it's completely dry, just hanging on the veranda, I don't even put it in an oven or anything, hang it on the veranda, and then I go and peel all the bay leaves off and put it in a jar. That's it. I've got bay leaves for the next 6 months. You only use one at a time when you're cooking, so 60 bay leaves, if you're cooking from scratch every night of the week, that's still 2 months worth of bay leaves you've got. That you don't have to buy, that you haven't had to buy from the shops. Now, another one, which is one that I've kind of dabbled in when we lived at Gunning on the 2.5 acres, and I haven't had a chance to do it here. And every time I try and do it, I have some kind of issue with my leg. So sprouting and microgreens. Sprouting, my kids enjoyed a little bit. They enjoyed having sprouts in salad and things like that. But microgreens is one that I have got some trays, and I did buy some seeds, and they're sitting in my seed cabinet and I haven't used them. But microgreens is something that can be done on a veranda. It doesn't have to take up a lot of space. A lot of people in the States, I've seen people do it in a spare bedroom where they have it all set up with mats underneath to take up the moisture. They go all fancy. They have those dehumidifiers in the room to stop the moisture so it doesn't get mouldy or anything like that. And they have overhead lights. So the microgreens are growing indoors without even sunlight. But if you have a windowsill that is big enough to put a tray on, or if you have a balcony or a veranda, then you can just put trays onto a rack. So just go down to your local reusables, we call it our green shed, where they sell furniture and things like that people have donated, and buy a garden tray or a shelving unit out of a garage or something like that. It doesn't have to be fancy. It can be secondhand, and some plastic trays, which if you go to the nursery, you can sometimes pick up plastic trays that they're throwing out. Even round pots you can grow microgreens in without a problem. And just have a look online. There's heaps of things about microgreens. Go and grow them and see how you go. Again, this is one that you can dry them and use them, like grind them up after they're dried and use them. A lot of people do that and market it as your greens that you can add to smoothies and things like that. But fresh greens, I mean, the only time I eat them, I've got to be honest, is when I go out to a restaurant or something like that and I have eggs Benny, and they always come out with, some of the lovely little microgreens sprinkled across the eggs Benny. But I love them and I would like to get into growing them. I think it would be a really interesting grow. Now, the interesting thing about microgreens is there's a real market for selling microgreens. A lot of people can't be bothered with it, but they like the idea of having microgreens. They are a very condensed version of the greens, so things like broccoli shoots, pea shoots, things like that, they have that real intense flavour. So people don't need as much of them, but they do add a real kick to cooking and to salads and things like that. There is a real market for selling them. So that might be something that you might look at doing in regards to making a little bit of money off the side, like cooking, growing microgreens that you're eating and consuming yourself, and any excess you've got either trading or selling them. Soap or cleaners. They're things that you don't need a backyard or any kind of large amount of space to do. You can absolutely do them in your own kitchen. Now, obviously with soap making, there are some times where you need to be in a well-ventilated area. But hot processing can be done on a kitchen bench. Cold processing, you need a ventilation area, but you only need a ventilation area for that one stage of mixing the caustic soda. So once you get past mixing the caustic soda, you really, like the ventilation is more just to help the soap dry out. And remember, of course, with cold processing, you do have to wait for the soap to, it's cold processing. You have to wait for the soap to cure over a number of weeks. Whereas with hot processing, pretty much it's good to go in about 24 hours. But again, just a cheap rack, like one of those cheap Bunnings racks, or a second-hand rack on a veranda area, in a garage area, where you can stack your soap to allow it to air cure and air dry. That's all we ever used when we've done it. We just have a rack that I stack it all on, and it's covered, but it's got a breeze coming through, so it's covered just to stop the soap getting dirty and dusty. But a breeze still comes through and the soap cures over a period of time. Then you go back out and collect it, after a couple of weeks, and it's good to go. Cleaning products, you can make them in your kitchen, absolutely. I mean, laundry powder, I whip that up in my Thermomix. It takes me about 5 minutes to make, and it lasts for about 2 months because I make a big batch of it when I do it. So that's something you can do in your kitchen without needing any space. Now, other things that you might look at will be things like the composting bins. If you're in a balcony, it might be harder, but if you do have a small courtyard area, I always forget how to say it properly, but the bokashi, which is the compost bin that you put. There's a little sprinkle of stuff that you put in there and it helps break it down. It makes basically worm tea, like it's the same kind of thing as composting tea at the end of it. Or a worm farm. Worm farms take up no space at all. You buy them at Bunnings, and you could probably get one secondhand if you look around, because sometimes people get them and then they don't use them. But they're just little round stackables that you have in the corner of the garden. It means that you'll be able to put stuff into your garden, a really concentrated fertiliser in your garden without using any chemicals, which would be awesome. Other things that you can do in that kind of really tight urban environment without any kind of land is sourdough bread. Make that in your kitchen without any problems at all. Fermenting. Now, I've said this before, you don't need to have grown the things that you're fermenting yourself. Go down to the markets on a Sunday afternoon when the fruit and veg places are getting ready to close up for a couple of days. Most of them are closed Monday or Tuesday at the market stalls. And go down and buy the end of day produce. You'll get it super, super cheap. Buy a cabbage, come home, put it in a fermenting pot, sit it on your kitchen bench. So long as you've got some space to sit it, you could sit it in your pantry cupboard so long as you had space for it. But you've just got to remember to do all the things that you do, where you make sure that the gas is coming off it and things like that. Make sure it's still covered by liquid, that kind of thing. Knitting and sewing. If you are at all, handy inclined, sewing can make such a difference, being able to sew your own things. We don't have a curtain in the house that I haven't made myself. Now, and I'm no great sewer, but making a curtain or sewing, I was just actually looking at plans for sewing shopping bags out of old feed bags to try and get rid of our feed bag issue, because we always have so many of them. And it's really one of those things where you're sewing in a straight line and it doesn't, like from a distance, I can't tell my kitchen curtains don't have a nice even hem. From a distance, they just look like kitchen curtains. Nobody can see the hem. So you don't even need to be super skilled at it. You just need to get in and have a go and do it. Now, if you are in that environment, what I would suggest to you is look online, places like Facebook or in local community pages, and see if you can join in with community gardens or permaculture groups. If you are in an urban environment, you'll find other like-minded people who are in that urban environment as well. And community gardens are a great way to start gardening when you don't have the space, when you don't have anything more than a balcony. It means that you can grow things that need a little bit more space, like corn and tomatoes and zucchinis and cucumbers and stuff like that. Being able to use a community garden bed, and you might have to go on a wait list. They're pretty popular, but it's worth getting in to know these people, because there might be times, if you're already doing soap and microgreens at home on your balcony, once you get tied in with a community gardens group, you might be able to swap some of your produce for somebody else's produce. Make life easier again. I love the idea of swapping goods. I think swapping goods is something that, it used to be done a lot. I want to say in the old days. Sound really boomery, don't I? But being able to trade goods, I'm awesome at growing tomatoes. I can grow tomatoes without even thinking about it. I don't know whether that's just the tomatoes are easy and I'm a terrible gardener. But there's other things like capsicums that I've always struggled to grow. I always fuck it up somehow, and I don't know why. Corn I grow really easy as well. But being able to swap tomatoes and corn for some capsicum would make life really easy. So I love the idea of swapping the things that you grow easy for something else that somebody else grows easy. So the next one, just let me have a little sip. Drinking gallons of magnesium water at the moment to try and help with cramps that I keep getting in my broken leg. So the next one is small block homesteading. And when I say small block homesteading, I'm talking your maybe, in Canberra. It does my head in. Years ago, I grew up in Sydney until I was like 11, 12, 13. Block sizes up there were all 1,000 square metres. That was probably just an average size block. Some were bigger, some were smaller, but that was an average size block. At the moment here in Canberra, block sizes are around 300 to 400 square metres, which is insanely small in my mind. When I lived in Canberra, the block that I had was 800 square metres, which was considered to be a really big block. In my mind, it wasn't a big block of land, but compared to the others around it, it was big. So small block homesteading. So this is your typical suburban backyard where you do have a grassed area. You do have maybe space for a couple of garden beds or edge garden beds around the outside of the fence. But it would be under half an acre. It's really not a huge amount of land. You may be renting. It may be more of a courtyard home. The house might be quite big on the block. You may not have a lot of space. But the kinds of things you can be looking at is all the things we talked about before, but then on top of that, raised garden beds or wicking beds where it's elevated. Now they could be the kind of garden beds that are actually fixed into the yard area, into the soil that you have, or they could be garden beds that are freestanding garden beds where you're adding soil into a garden bed and growing something from there. I know I've seen a lot of people with balconies with those kind of garden beds as well. But if you're in a rental and you don't want to dig up lawn or anything like that, then that might be a really good option for you to start getting going with gardening. Keeping backyard chickens. Now, people seem to think, I don't have enough land, I don't have even half an acre, so therefore I can't have backyard chickens. You actually probably can have backyard chickens. 3 chickens in one of those omelette igloo type cages where you move it around on the lawn area regularly, like every other day kind of thing, you actually can keep them in a backyard environment. And usually, and you need to check with your council rules for your area, but usually there's no problem with it so long as there's no roosters in there. Nobody wants a rooster crowing at 4 o'clock in the morning in an urban environment, which is kind of understandable. We've got 3 roosters at the moment and we can hear them in our house when they crow in the morning, and we're probably, I want to say 250 metres away from them, maybe 300 metres away from them, and we can hear them crow. So if they were right at your back door, it would probably be pretty annoying, especially if they weren't your chickens. But you can keep backyard chickens. 3 chickens living in a backyard would be no problem at all. And like I say, if you have one of those movable cages, you're essentially fertilising your lawn as you go, because the chickens are there getting rid of any bugs and things like that out of the grass, but they're dropping their poo all the way through. Every time you move, you're putting them on fresh grass and they've fertilised the area they've just come off. Vertical gardens or container gardens are another one. Like I said, if you're in a rental property, you may not want to dig up lawn area. Your landlord may not be happy with that. But growing things in containers, you can have containers all the way around. If you had just a paved area, you can cover it in containers and raised beds and vertical gardening systems where you've got a small pot up against a fence that you've got trellis material on, where you're growing it up that way. A lot of plants do really well on trellises like that, growing upright. Zucchinis, cucumbers do well. Capsicums, like I say, I've never been successful with that. Tomatoes will grow up like that. If you've got fruit trees, I've seen, they call them, there's a name for them, Parellia or something like that, Aparellia, something like that, where they grow them vertically and along a fence. And they can actually have really good crop production growing that way, really high yield kind of stuff. Now, when you're starting out, it's probably a good idea to go with things that are high yield, low maintenance kind of crops. So things like lettuces grow really easy and you can just go out and take them as you need them. Beans generally, if they're growing right, if they're well fertilised, you will get so many beans. Cherry tomatoes are my fallback. I think this year is probably the first year we haven't had a cherry tomato. We had a cherry tomato even last year when I wasn't gardening because of my knee. Cherry tomatoes, the kids will just go out. The problem is we never get to bring them in and put them in a salad because the kids will go out and just strip the plant of them because they feel like eating fresh cherry tomatoes. But cherry tomatoes can just be so prolific and they're so easy to grow in a pot. So it's a great one to start with. Now, obviously, home preserving. If you do have a massive amount, like beans, you can snap freeze beans if you need to. You can can beans, but also too, like I said, go to the markets last thing in the afternoon and bulk buy, and come home and process those. It's a great way of doing it when you don't necessarily have garden space to grow all of those kind of items. Now, another thing you can do in those smaller environments is composting bins and worm farms, like we spoke about before. They don't take up a lot of space. And rainwater tanks, particularly if you're in your own home, I would strongly encourage you to have a rainwater tank. If not plumbed into the house and using for house water, then the rainwater tank would be awesome for gardening, to use it for keeping plants alive, for feeding chooks, anything like that, keeping garden beds alive. Having your own rainwater, it means you're not going to have to pay for council water, but you'll still have an abundance of water that you're never going to run out of. Now, the next one, the 1/4 acre classic block. So anything between, I say 1/4 acre, but anything between 1/2 acre to 1 acre, pretty much. But people used to refer them as 1/4 acre because by the time you have a house on it, you that's pretty much what land you've got left. And it used to really be the Aussie dream. People used to dream about having this larger block. And certainly in the Canberra surrounds, towns like Murrumbateman, Sutton, Gundaroo are really pushing those bigger block areas now. So you're getting blocks that are sized between 1,000 square metres and 2,000 square metres. And that really means that you do have the space to do some things. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to be a farm. We're not going to that extent. But certainly on those kind of 1 acre blocks, I mean, if you go onto Pinterest and have a look, type in, how to set up my 1 acre block for producing all my food, you will be surprised what you get back from it. So, one of the things I didn't mention in a smaller urban block, you can still have a beehive in a smaller urban block. Have a look for your regulations depending on where you are. But in Australia, you can have 1 beehive in a normal house block. And then as you get more land, you can have more beehives. That's another thing. Honey, having your own honey source is just amazing. But so you're 1/2 to 1 acre block. The kinds of things you want to be looking at there is everything we've already spoken about, But here you definitely have enough space for chickens. You could have a good sized chicken coop. With a run, you could have a chicken coop that you can use as a mobile one like we spoke about before. You could have a couple of ducks if you didn't want chickens. Ducks are an awesome thing. They just need a pond because they do like to have water. But duck eggs are amazing, and they can be quite big. So one chicken egg is one duck egg is probably equivalent about 2 chicken eggs, in most cases. Fruit trees. If you are on a 1 acre block, you would have fruit trees out the wazoo. Fruit and nut trees would be awesome. You could have a border of them all the way around your property, which would give you some privacy as well, but gives you all that ability to grow all the different fruits. Now, what I've done in the past, certainly on our 2.5 acres that we had at Gunning, we had all of our fruit trees in one area, and we fenced that area, and we then used the underside, so the ground level of our fruit tree area was our chicken run. And that was because the chickens helped us prevent codling moth in our apple trees. So you've got to think a bit smarter sometimes, not harder. Having the chicken coop underneath the orchard means that they will eat any rotten fruit that falls off the trees, they will devour it, but they will also take care of any pests that are prolific within your orchard area, which saves you having to put nasty chemical for pesticides in there. You don't want to use pesticides. I was watching an article the other day about a guy who's used glyphosate, I think that's how you pronounce it, Roundup, most of his life, and he's now got cancer. We didn't think about it long term, but these chemical pesticides, they're not good for anybody. If they kill a pest, they're not good for us. Anyway, my rant over. Use your chooks and ducks to get rid of the pests around your fruit trees. Remember the saying, you don't have a pest problem. You don't have too many pests. You have not enough predators. So where you have an oversupply of pests, you want to put more predators in. And in this case, chickens and ducks, which are going to give us eggs. So it's a win-win. You can rotate garden plots. So if you're on a 1 acre block, you can definitely have rotating garden beds, which means that your soil health is always going to be amazing. You can have a small shed for firewood if you have a wood fire that you can use in winter to try and heat your house and cook food. Rainwater collection on a 1 acre block, you would be crazy not to have a rainwater tank. I think everybody's crazy not to have a rainwater tank if you have a normal house. But on a 1 acre block, there's a good chance you may not be on mains water, in which case you have to have a rainwater collection. And I would say we did it here. As soon as we moved in, we put in the biggest tank we could. And I would say that to anybody, whatever size block you're on or however you want to structure it, put in the biggest size tank you can afford to put in. Bees, obviously, I forgot to mention it in the urban block. You can have it in an urban block, but on a 1 acre block, you would be crazy not to have bees. I just spoke to my mum the other day, and she said they had floods 12 months ago where they lived, and it wiped out a lot of the bee populations. They were pretty bad floods. And as a result, her garden this year, she said, has been terrible. She said, there's just no bees. Nothing's getting pollinated. So having bees with a garden or fruit tree area is going to be a godsend for you. Use every corner. Think permaculture wise. Think about, those areas immediately around your house. You want your herbs and your things that you're going to go to all the time. Medicinal plants, you could start going down a medicinal plant line, which saves you then having to buy, salves and things like that from the chemist. Worm farms or compost farms, a fire pit outside. Now, a fire pit outside is a great idea if you have enough space, particularly coming into preserving and processing season. If you can cook things outside in big batches, if you can dehydrate things outside in big batches, that's always going to be a win. We're in a tiny house, so we have to do some things out on the veranda because we just clearly don't have the space inside for it. Now, if you're in that kind of 1 acre kind of environment, there's a good chance you're surrounded by other people who are also on 1 acres. And this is where it's really important to get to know your neighbours, because if you have an abundance of chicken eggs or an abundance of apples off your fruit tree, that's the time to try and swap out. Swap out with somebody else who's been growing something else and try and trade or share with them. You could just straight out share. I mean, if you're not worried about earning money, just share with people. The handy helper he's at work today, but he came home last night. One of his workmates makes sourdough bread that she puts olives and herbs and things like that in. And he said she actually makes she just loves baking. She makes 10 or 20 loaves and takes it in and hands them out to homeless people in Canberra, which I think is just beautiful that she doesn't, it's just because she loves baking. So she goes ahead and makes all the loaves. But then, there's only so many give away to family and friends. So she goes and gives them away to people that are in need and probably really appreciate them. And we were lucky enough to get a loaf ourselves off her. So even though I've been trying to be no carb for the last couple of days, I may well have myself a piece of bread later today and have a bit of a test on that, because I do love a good loaf of sourdough. And I haven't been making it at the moment because with my leg being broken, there's some things I just can't do. Now, the last one I want to talk about, second last one, is 1 to 5 acres. So this is your serious hobby homesteads. So these are people, and unless you already live on a 1 to 5 acre block, this is where I say to you, I would not advocate you just selling everything up and going to a 1 to 5 acre block without at least trialing the lifestyle first. And that's because once you get to that bigger block, the 5 acres, there's a whole bunch of chores that come with looking after 5 acres that don't come with looking after 1 acre. So once you get past that 1 acre amount and you get into the 2, 3, 4, 5 acres, there's a change in your work pattern, and it's not for everybody. And I don't think you need to beat yourself up about it if it's not for you. I think you can just say, well, you know what, I can be a homesteader on 1 acre and that's fine too. So what do you need to think about for 1 to 5 acres? Obviously, all the things that we've talked about before, but with that 1 to 5 acre, particularly pushing that 5 acre, you're now going to be able to start looking at livestock, genuinely looking at livestock. So obviously you could have chickens, and you could have a lot of chickens on 5 acres. Our chickens probably live on less than 5 acres, and we rotate their yard around so that they're always on fresh pasture. But it'd be less than 5 acres that they rotate through. So, and we've pushed the 2 flocks together now. So I think we've got we've probably got 35 chickens up there that are surviving quite fine on 5 acres without a problem. Which obviously we have enough eggs then to sell. So if you're on 5 acres, that would be a great way of selling. And unless you're over, I forget their number, but it's something like 300 eggs a week. Unless you're producing more than 300 eggs a week for sale, you don't need to be registered to sell them in Australia. So that's a win-win. Now, but on 1 to 5 acres, you can also have meat birds. Meat birds don't take up a lot of space. If you have a look at my book, Brood at a Plate, we talk about it there. It's the cage is like 1.5 meters, 2 meters by 2 meters kind of thing, and you drag it across the ground. Those chickens are alive for 8 weeks, and the first 3 weeks of that they're in a brooder house. So you have a brooder house that's only the last 5 weeks they're out on grass, and literally you're moving them 2 meters a day. So 5 acres you could absolutely do it on. And you then have the space also to process the birds without, causing any kind of grief. You could even have a pig, a goat, or a sheep on 5 acres. Now, goats, I know people that have 5 acres and have more than 1 goat, more than 2 goats. I always recommend having 2. They're herd animals and they like to be together. But having a milking sheep, because don't forget, you can East Frisian sheep are milking sheep, and sheep's milk's supposed to be really good. It makes awesome cheese. But you could have a sheep that you're fattening up to eat, to put in the freezer, to go to freezer camp. You could have a couple of goats that you're milking. You could have a pig, depending on the area. You need to check council regulations there. Certain size blocks, they won't allow you to have pigs. And in certain areas where there's a lot of pigs, there is stipulations about how many pigs you can keep and where you can keep them. You have to keep them back from fence lines and things like that. I've never bothered to go into pigs because they can be a little bit hard to manage here in Australia as far as diseases and things like that. Orchard space. Man, you should be able to have an amazing orchard on 5 acres. And like I say, use it. Put your chicken run under it. You don't have to rotate your chickens everywhere. If you have a big enough yard, they're going to be fine. You just need to keep the coop clean so that you don't have to worry about pests and worms and things like that. But having chickens in an orchard space where they are picking up the old dead fruit that falls to the ground, any pests that are there loitering, trying to get at the fruit, it's an awesome idea. Nut trees, I would include in that too. Now, with 5 acres, anything probably 2 acres and above, you do have the ability to section areas off and paddock rotate. So using proper regenerative agriculture practices, you can rotate your goats, rotate your sheep through different paddocks, your chickens through different paddocks, so that they end up, we have less of a parasite load because they're able to move from paddock to paddock, and they're not getting that worm burden that they would get if they're in the same paddock, eating in the same spot all the time, eating out of their own poo, depending on how much you want to clean up. And I mean, you could go in and clean up every day. You know, if you're on 2 acres, you might have it so that your goats are in an area where they're only eating hay out of a hay feeder, which could get a bit expensive. And for most of the day, they're not exposed to the rest of the paddock, and therefore you're cleaning up the poo because you might have it in an area where you can easily clean up the poo. But I would suggest rotating paddocks if possible. It's much better for them. It means it's less labour intensive for you. You don't have to pick up the poop. The poop is going to fertilise the ground. You just need to be able to rotate them through to keep them off the old poo. Water management does become more important. So you may have to have a dam, you may have to have a bore sunk, you may need more water tanks, especially if you've got livestock, you're going to be feeding your livestock. So you really need to think about water troughs, water tanks, dams, things like that. You also need to start thinking on those kind of size blocks, especially if you have livestock, about fencing, sheds, shelters and tools. You cannot have livestock if they're not properly fenced. It's probably, and I think I talk about it next week because I've already done it, my cheat sheet for what I want to talk about. Not fencing areas properly for livestock is going to be the thing that causes you the most drama with your neighbours. And potentially with your livestock. Livestock will escape at every opportunity. They're not stupid. If they want to get out, they'll get out. But you really need to think about shelters as well. If you have livestock, most goats, apart from my Angoras who are crazy, all my milking goats hate the rain, so they need a shelter to go into when it's raining. Sheep and Angora goats tend to not bother about the rain so much, but still having some shelter for them, shade trees at the bare minimum, but having a shelter that throws shade but still has a breeze. So we have a shelter that we built out of pallets and we have a shade cloth around the back of it. So it's still shaded in there, but there's a breeze that comes through so that in summer months they can go in there to get out of the sun and still get the breeze on them. Obviously, water troughs, feed troughs. You don't want to feed on the ground. Feeding on the ground is what causes internal parasites. If you can have a feeder where you do put hay or any hard feed that you're feeding them up off the ground, there is less chance they're going to be consuming their own poo. If they're not consuming their own poo, it's going to be much easier to manage internal parasite loads. Tools. If you're on 5 acres, let me tell you, you are not going to want to use a push mower unless you have lots of livestock who are all dealing with the grass issue for you. We have a ride-on mower that we use. It's not a slasher, but it is a very big ride-on mower. And certainly we skim paddocks that animals are still going into, but we'll skim them to get rid of weed growth and things like that. We also will low mow around fence lines, particularly around our house area, because we obviously have a problem with snakes here in Australia. For us here particularly, we have 3 highly venomous snakes that live in this area, which is a brown snake, the common brown snake, which is probably the most venomous. And then we also have the tiger snake, which can inflict a really seriously nasty bite. And then the very reclusive, normally red-bellied black snake. But red-bellied black snakes are still deadly and they will still kill you, and you still want to see them before you stand on them. You certainly want to be given the opportunity to move away from them rather than walk towards them. So we mow all around our house blocks really low around the fence lines, and inside our house block is always kept really low. And that's just so that we can see them before we get to them, and it means that we can then take the precautions necessary so we don't get bitten. And that's another thing that you have to think about in rural areas. There's going to be pests that are deadly. Now, I know we have Sydney funnel webs, so people that live in urban areas in Sydney still have to deal with funnel webs, which I grew up in Sydney, when I was young, and funnel webs were the biggest thing that we had to worry about. If you went outside into the garden in certain months of the year, or for some reason they liked pools. I can remember my mum always saying, check the pool before you get in case there's any funnel webs around the edge. But for us here in a rural environment, we are dealing with all of the snakes. We also have lizards, but the lizards are generally not so bad. Your lace monitors, sometimes called goannas, if you came across one of them, you would get a nasty bite. But they are very, very timid animals, and they will run before they come at you. You would have to really go out of your way to get bitten by one of them. Blue tongues and shinglebacks and we have Cunningham skinks here as well. Again, they're all shy animals. They're not going to bite you unless they're cornered and provoked. We tend to pick up the shinglebacks and the blue tongues. We just pick them up and move them to another part of the garden because our Kelpie dog that lives in our house block gets very irritated by them, so she's always barking at them. So we move them rather than listen to her bark for the next hour while the poor shingleback tries to get out of the yard. And unfortunately, she has bit and killed a shingleback before, and I don't like to see them killed. They're not an animal that's bothering me. We have a lot of wasps and things like that in the areas that we live in. Now, they can happen in urban areas too, but we seem to have a lot more of them out here. We get magpies, cockatoos, all that kind of thing. Honestly, we have less problem with our magpies here than anybody in town has with magpies. Magpies have a swooping season where they will attack people riding push bikes and things like that. Our magpies know us, and we throw them a little bit of chicken food every now and again, and they think that's great. And I think they've imprinted on us now, and they know that we're friend, not foe, so they don't give us any grief. We have a couple of wedge-tailed eagles that live here. Again, wedge-tailed eagles won't come near a human, not by choice. They basically just clean up any old carrion on the road. So any dead rabbits, dead kangaroos, they will go and eat. Now, some farmers say they'll take lambs and kids, but I've never had a problem with that. We've never lost a goat kid to a wedge-tailed eagle. An old farmer friend of mine said what he does is, because he's a sheep grower, what he does is he will go and shoot rabbits and then throw the rabbits somewhere, like on a rock or a log or something like that. And he said 9 times out of 10, the wedge-tailed eagles will come and take a dead rabbit, overtaking a baby sheep any day of the week, because it's an easier kill for them. It's an easier feed. So he does that as a matter of course, because he loves the wedge-tails as well and he doesn't want them destroyed. Some farmers in the past used to shoot them, which is not great. We also have things like owls. We have bats here, but none of them are problematic. Foxes are probably the next biggest issue, or getting hit by a kangaroo is probably the next biggest issue. We've had to chase kangaroos out of paddocks where they've got stuck and they haven't been able to jump over the fence, younger kangaroos. And honestly, I'm more worried about the kids getting walloped by a kangaroo than I am by a fox. Both animals are timid. Both animals are anti-people. They will avoid people where possible. It's usually when we corner them that we have an issue. So if we don't go near them, we're fine. Foxes see us and bolt, so that's not a problem. And the only other animal that we really deal, or 2 animals that we really deal with here in rural areas are echidnas and wombats. Now, wombats can be very aggressive. Don't let the cuddly nature of them fool you. They look like ground koalas, but they can be very, very aggressive. And every time I've had to move one out of a paddock because the goats freak out when they see them, I take a metal rake with me to try and push it out of the paddock, and 9 times out of 10 it will hiss and growl and carry on and run at me like it's going to charge me. So yeah, we don't get a lot of them, but we do move them on out of the paddocks because the other animals get a bit put off by them. Echidnas we get here all the time. We have so many echidnas here, and the only real issue is the dogs bark at them, which is quite annoying. But the problem with echidnas is you try to pick them up to move them, you need to put a cloth over them because the spikes will go into your skin. So you need to put a cloth over them to move them. And as soon as they get scared, they burrow into the ground with their little claws. Their claws are so sharp, they can hang on to the ground. The handy helper has stood there and tried to lift one up out of the ground one day, and he was like, I can't move this thing. It's hanging onto soil, to dirt and roots so hard I can't move it. But again, they're not an animal that's going to hurt you. but it is something you need to think about if you're moving to a rural area. Now, the last one I want to talk about, and I need to hurry up because I'm going to go over time. The last one is 5 acres and up. So everything we've already discussed, all the things inside and out that we've already discussed, but now you're scaling up. Now you're scaling up to probably what would be more of a commercial concern. And that's what we're trying to aim for here, certainly with our egg production, with our meat birds. You know, that's the kind of next level that we're going to. So the kinds of things you're looking at on 5 acres or more is more animals, which includes more infrastructure, more time, more feeding, more fencing, larger animals, so cows like we have here. We also have horses. Horses are not homesteading animals. You can't get any benefit out of a horse, but it's nice to have sometimes. But you can have horses on more than 5 acres. You can have cows on more than 5 acres. You can have more than 2 goats on more than 5 acres. You could have more than 2 sheep on more than 5 acres. So more of everything. You can also have, on the kind of size that we're looking at, you can have almost unlimited beehives. You do have to be registered as a beekeeper here in Australia because we have diseases and things like that. But you can have a lot of beehives on more than 5 acres without a problem. Now, you do have to manage your land. So you do have to think about weed control, paddock rotation, erosion prevention, dams, trees, fencing, all those things. And if you're not prepared for that, then I would say stay under the 5 acres. Because once you get over 5 acres, it does become a real chore. Handy Helper and I do not have spare time. When people say, you know, things like, oh, we went to the movies or we went out to dinner, and we look at each other and go, wouldn't that be nice? We don't have time for that, because every time we're not working or every time we're not, you know, doing something with family directly, we are out working in the farm. We're out fixing fences, we're out making sure shelters are right, we're out making sure that animals have been wormed and drenched and they don't have lice and they've got no health issues, their hooves are fine, all that kind of stuff. So it does become a lot more involved. Now, the potential for commercial production is, of course, a lot higher once you get over those 5 acres. So egg sales, we sell at the moment, we're selling probably 12 cartons a week. 12 or 10, maybe 10 at the moment. The girls, we had that fox attack and I lost a few girls. So probably about 10 cartons a week we're selling at the moment without a problem. Soap, you could do soap on a larger scale. Dadadoo Anglo-Nubians, who I know up from Rockhampton, she makes soap and she does it on a production level scale. She also milks her goats and feeds the goat's milk to pigs that she raises and then sells the pigs to the local butcher, and evidently this pork is just amazing because it's milk-fed pork. I mean, of course it's going to taste beautiful. Produce boxes. If you're doing gardening on a large scale, you could be selling produce boxes. You could be going to the markets and selling produce making. If you're on more than 5 acres, you could probably have an outdoor oven setup where you could be doing a scalable sourdough production. You could be canning at a larger rate because you have more land to grow more food. You can have root cellars where you're storing things. You can dig out an underground root cellar and store your produce underground, which means that you could supply yourself with fruit and veg over the winter months when you were normally not growing things. You do need to think about things like solar, dams, irrigation setups, which cost more. And there's planning involved. We have a tank, we have a 25,000 litre tank up on our hill, and that feeds to our house. So we pump our rainwater collection tank is right next to the house, and it's a 200,000 litre, I want to say, 180,000 litre tank. It collects all of our rainwater. We have a pump attached to it. It pumps up the hill to the 25,000 litre tank, which about once a week we turn the pump on and pump and fill that tank up. And then that feeds our goat water, because the milking goats get clean fresh water, not dam water. And our entire house, all of our washing, all of our showering, all of our cooking, drinking water, everything comes out of that tank. But you have to, there's work involved there. So you have to think about that. Now, it's not, I would say, if you're a complete beginner and you've never done anything with livestock or gardening in that larger scale, I would say do not jump into more than 5 acres first up. the 2.5 acres I had at Gunning was the perfect start for me and the handy helper. I'd lived on a larger farm prior, but not doing it myself. I was just following the instructions of my parents because I was a teenager and I had chores that I had to do, like milking the cow, feeding the pigs, that kind of thing. And I knew to do those things and I knew how to do those things. And I'm quite confident that I could do them. But when you are the one in control and you're the one in charge, it's a little bit different. So going to the 2.5 acres for us was a really good stepping stone to then go to a bigger farm. It gave the handy helper an opportunity to see what was involved in chicken keeping, having to dispatch chooks, which he'd never had to do before Gunning. Our milking goats we had at Gunning. Handy helper dug out, oh God, I had probably about 7 or 8 garden beds that I was growing. We had our beehive, we had the fenced off orchard area. We had 2 rainwater tanks that we had to manage the rainwater system. And we were on mains water, but we were using the rainwater as much as we could to avoid having to pay for rainwater. But we had sewage problems there. We had fencing problems there. They're all things that were on a very small scale, prepared us for what we moved to here. So I would say definitely start smaller if you are somebody who's not lived in that environment before. It sounds terrible, but you can always sell and move again. People, I don't know why people get this thing that, oh, I can't sell and move, that's my house. Well, yeah, you can. If it's not what you want, life changes. Lifestyles change, and going forward and getting to a bigger property or moving backwards to a smaller property, it shouldn't be such an issue. If your lifestyle's changed and what you want and need out of life has changed, you should be able to say, well, my life's changed. I was on an acre and I loved it, and now I want 10 acres because I think I love that more, and I think I'm ready for that, and I think I want a milking cow or a couple of milking goats, or I want to, do a larger scale production of my eggs or do meat birds. Just do it. Do it. It's hard. I'm not going to say it's not hard. When we moved from the 2.5 acres to the 120 acres, we had to get bridging finance. That was the scariest 5 months of my life, having bridging finance. I was a reverse millionaire for 5 months, and it killed me because I'm normally very conservative with my money. And so it did kill me for that brief period of time. But once Gunning sold, then I could sit back and go, oh, no, okay, I'm actually tracking really good with finances. So don't think you can't do it. Don't think that you have to go all in to 10 acres first up when you've never done that before. Go a bigger block, or even just in your urban block, try and do all the homesteading things there and see whether or not the lifestyle's for you before you move to a large block of land. And just remember, you don't ever have to move to the large block of land. You could be a homesteader on a house block. You absolutely can do it. And if anybody says you can't, tell them to come and speak to me. I'll set them straight. Anyway, that is it. Now, the other thing I was going to say was what you do have to take into account when you get to those bigger blocks is workload around your daytime job. Most of us can't afford to quit our jobs. Certainly the handy helper and I both work full time. You do have to factor in your time around your day job, and it's hard. I have a calendar with a list of tasks each day, a list of things that need doing. Alerts get sent to the handy helper and both the kids. They both have the Google Calendar as well, and it tells them what they need to do each day. And it sounds like an army camp, but we have to run it like that because then we know everything gets done. You can't have animals without water or food. So what I want you to get out of this is that it's not about size. Remember the old joke? It's not about size. For those adults out there, hopefully there's no kids listening in the back of cars. It isn't about size. Size doesn't matter. It's about using what you have well. So if you're on half an acre, just use it really well. Use it smart. Grow one tomato plant. If you've only got a balcony, grow a cherry tomato on your balcony. You'll be fine. Make some soap. Now, if you get a soap recipe off the internet and you go, oh, that's for like 40 bars of soap and I don't want 40 bars of soap, cut the recipe in half. Make 20 bars of soap. Believe me, you'll use 20 bars of soap. It's still homesteading. Make your sourdough. Get your sourdough starter going, today. And in 14 days, go to www.mojohomestead.net and look up sourdough starter checklist and you'll be able to print out a cheat sheet that walks you through getting your sourdough starter up and running. Get that up and running, make bread in 2 weeks' time. Take the bread into work, give it away. If you don't want to eat it yourself, take it into work, give it away. If you haven't got kids, keep half a loaf and take the other half in and say, does anybody want some sourdough bread? Believe me, you will have takers. Then plan for what you want in the future. Now, if you once you get going 6 months, 12 months into it, if you think, no, I really do need more land, start planning for that. Start thinking about it. Start with a community garden. If you can spend the time doing a community garden each afternoon, then going to a bigger block, you're going to look after your garden. Don't let not having the land now stop you from starting. Just start with whatever you've got and whatever you can. And with each stage comes different responsibilities, so you just need to take that on. Now, if you already have an urban setup, I would love to see it. So please take a photo and link me in the socials at Mojo Homestead. If you are thinking about moving to a block, sing out to me. I would love to give you any advice that you might need as far as what to think about moving to a bigger block. We're looking at doing a couple of courses in the new year. They're going to be evergreen courses. I'm going to do a launch, but then I'll just let them run. And don't forget, you can jump on the newsletter. Go to www.mojohomestead.net and you'll see a bunch of freebies that you can get there, and that will get you on the newsletter list. And next week, we are talking about the 10 beginner mistakes when it comes to homesteading. Anyway, I've gone a bit over time. That's it for me today. I will talk to you all again next week. Bye for now. Well, that's it for today's episode of Ditch the Store. If you're loving the journey to self-sufficiency, be sure to subscribe. You can also leave a review for us or share this episode with a friend who's ready to break up with their supermarket. If you've got questions or success stories, we'd love to hear about them on the socials. You can also find me at www.mojohomestead.net. Until next time, keep raising, growing and making. And remember, life's too short for store-bought eggs.